I think we're live. Good morning, folks, wherever you are out there. Welcome. This is the Charge Life Podcast. I am Joseph Barletta, and this is where we discuss EVs and all things EV charging. Glad you could pull over and park with us today. So let's get plugged in. This episode is all about Tesla's NACS just certification, just been certified by SAE. I mean, what will it fix? We don't know. I think you're going to love this one. Hey, before we begin today's episode, it's brought to you by Smart Charge America. Since 2007, Smart Charge America has installed tens of thousands of EV charging stations nationwide, and they can do the same for you today. Whether in the home, commercial, or service, let their team of expert installation specialists guide you to the very best charging solution for your needs. After all, you can't charge, you can't drive. Visit smartchargeamerica.com today to get started. Okay, Tesla's NACS standard just certified by SAE. So, yes, what will it fix? We don't know. The first note to know is that this is a technology revolution happening like literally as we speak when it comes to EV technology, ADAS technology, AI. That's it. That's all you have to know. We're talking AI. Okay. Now, this rapid pace of innovation, it makes it extremely difficult to establish standards. I mean, some can say that by the time one standard is birthed, however long it takes for that standard to be birthed, it may already be inferior to another emerging technology on the horizon. But for all intents purposes, this episode right now, we're talking about here today is mainly focused on EV and EV charging and the EV charging space. And so, if you want to do a small little history report behind the Tesla NACS and then the SAE and how the SAE standards have come into play in the entire electric vehicle industry, we're going to run over a real brief synopsis for you. So, in 2001, SAE released the J1772 EV charging standard right after the infamous EV1 program was destroyed by GM. So I find that kind of ironic there. And then, of course, in 2010, GM and Nissan both released their Leaf and Volt vehicles, both using the new SAE J1772. So, boom, the electric vehicle revolution starts, right? So, you can see the on the Leaf they basically had CHAdeMO connector inside their charging port. So they had both the J1772 and the CHAdeMO, which was the Japanese-based version for DC fast charging. So that was unique. That was the first time the world has seen, oh, what is this DC fast charging? I can charge my car in 30 minutes. Oh, okay, that's cool. So we could do that. And of course, in 2010, the U.S. begins to install Japanese-based CHAdeMO DC fast charging connectors in public charging spaces, mainly in kind of Nissan-based dealerships, a few in and around town where they could put them in. But that's where we started. We started seeing a slow rollout of the CHAdeMO DC fast charging infrastructure. And of course, in 2012, Tesla blows everything apart by debuting their Model S, and they've also uh, basically debuted their first supercharger site in Hawthorne, California. And so that's in 2012. So now in 2013, the all but infamous BMW i3 is released, and the i3 is the first car that we see with the J1772, and it's got these two pins underneath that make a connection for the new SAE CCS combo connector, which is the SAE's DC fast charging version of their connector. So basically, in 2015, the U.S. starts to transition its SAE DC fast charging connector fleet from that of CHAdeMO to CCS. Now, it's very important that SAE, the CHAdeMO was never an SAE standard. CCS was the SAE standard. CHAdeMO was just a standard that was based out of Japan, and because it was so fluent in Japan, the U.S. market kind of absorbed it. They took it in under their umbrella, but they soon, basically, since just kind of petered off of that standard. And so, in 2015, the U.S. Starts that transition, and of course, 7 years later, in 2022, the NEVI funds are released. And so we see this huge wave influx of EV charging infrastructure across the nation. And then, of course, Tesla shortly thereafter releases their proprietary charging connector standard to the world, Visa, called the NACS, which it stands for the North American Charging Standard. So, of course, 13 months or so later, the SAE just now has standardized the NACS connector. And so, what does that mean? Okay, well, the traditional means of the standardization process Basically, it's like, okay, it's country based and then it's international based. So anytime you have a protocol that has to go through the international ring of standardization, it could take 5, 6, almost sometimes 7, 8 years to do that because you have each country has had their subcommittees that have to approve the standards, and then once that standard is released, then it's released to other countries, and then once all those countries, then it goes to the international board, and it just takes a lot of time. The good thing is that when Tesla released their proprietary network, it's a network that already existed. It's been working. It's been doing wonders for the past decade. So the ability to standardize an already existing infrastructure and technology, it basically it was still difficult, but it was done at an accelerated rate, unlike no other connector standard out there. And so we were really fortunate that, and that was the reason why SAE was really able to, kind of fast track this in their standardization process. So Charin's recent annual testable, they call it, was held in Cleveland, Ohio, earlier last month, and basically this event brings charging engineers, OEMs, EV charging providers all over the nation under one roof for 3 days. And you can kind of think of it like speed dating for EVs when it comes to charging. And so, every single EV manufacturer is in there with their EVs, and bam, 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 trying to just making sure that they're meeting all the requirements, meeting all the protocols, so forth and so on. Now, Charin's an international standards organization, and so they travel the world. And I believe in January they're going to be in the Netherlands, and maybe in March they'll be, if I'm not mistaken, they'll be in Korea. And so you're seeing like Charin is playing a principal part in getting the organizations and these standards done, not only here in America but also internationally for other countries, and they also help the international um, umbrella for what it comes to all things EV charging standards. And so, yeah. So look, you know, if you if you think about what Charin's ability to be in Cleveland, Ohio, to be in the U.S., I mean, that was really big for the charging universe here in the U.S. And so, Tesla's NACS standard, now taking the name of the SAE 3400, was the talk of the event. Make no mistake about it. And so there was a lot of excitement building, and just waiting for SAE to finally release these. And so, what do we know? What will it fix? Well, okay. Well, to kind of understand a little bit about what it fixes, I'm just going to try to break it down to you as simple as we can. So need to know a little bit about electricity, not too much, but in the US, we have two different voltage categories that we operate most of our electric needs from. So we have single phase, which generally is 120, 240 volt. That's kind of the electricity that you use in your home. Okay. And then in the commercial zone areas, we use three phase. And so that's typically like kind of double 240. It's like 480 volts. Okay. So just remember single phase, three phase. Okay. Residential, commercial. Okay. So one of the most important pieces for this new NAC standard that most people miss is the simple fact that, well, it has the ability to do both AC and DC charging with the same connector type. The same, literally, same connector can do both AC and DC, whereas none of the previous SAE standards could do that. You had to have the J1772 for all things AC, then you had to have the CCS uh, connector for all things DC. And now it's just like, okay, let's just move away from all of that and just go with one plug, which is the Tesla NAC standard. So that's one of the unique things on their end. But what we're seeing is this demand, this consumer demand, that we're telling organizations that, yes, if we have the ability to, let's condense and let's standardize for today's technology, capitalizing on better features for the future. That's what standardization is all about. And so we're super stoked on to hear and to see and to share with you guys some of the things that SAE has actually brought to surface with their standardization of the next connector. So one of the things was that the if you look at, I'm trying to think, if you're going down your neighborhoods and you're seeing on your telephone poles your transformers, you'll see multiple poles, down the single block, or you'll see the transformers kind of in your neighborhood. Um, I would say lawns, they're kind of buried or hidden behind, landscape and stuff like that. So what those transformers do on a commercial to residential setting is they dumb down the voltage from 480 volts to 240 volts and supply that electricity to your home so your home can operate. Okay, if your home just had an influx of 480 volts, everything would explode. Nothing would work. It wouldn't no, nothing would be able to work. And so that's what kind of the difference between the single phase and three phase. So three phase just offers a lot more power for what it's given. And so, given that, you have to understand that EVs are extremely sensitive when it comes to voltage fluctuations. And so, in the residential setting, when it comes to like 240 volts, if we go out and we service a charging station, and that charging station is reading voltages somewhere around like 229, 228, it's going to cause problems with the connection with the electric vehicle, and the electric vehicle is like, hey, look, something's wrong here. I'm not, but that is generally caused by fluctuations from the grid, from your electric like utility source, and those can fluctuate, from time to time. So very rare, but they do happen. And so that's where the sensitivity of the electric vehicles they're very sensitive to that voltage fluctuation. So, you know, I would say, let's say anywhere between 10 volts up, 10 volts down on 240. And the same with DC fast charging when it comes to 480 volts. So it's extremely very, very wise to know that because of this, EVs are extremely sensitive to that voltage drop. So if you look at a commercial charging space, okay, if we're going to go into a commercial building and we're going to install EV charging infrastructure, let's say level two uh, public charging infrastructure, okay. Well, generally, remember what we've talked about is the commercial buildings have three phase electrical system, and level two is primarily ran off of single phase when it comes to that charging power that's put in. That's why it takes 2 hours to 2 to 3 hours to charge a car, using public charging stations that are level two, 240 volt powered, as opposed to 10, 15 minutes with DC fast charging power, depending on your charging curve and all that good stuff. And so what happens is when we go to that commercial setting is already built for three phase. So what we have to do is we have to go in and we have to tap out of that three phase panel. We have to add a transformer. We have to add another panel, which is now a single phase panel, because that transformer again bucks down that voltage from 480 to 240. And so now we can tap out of this panel and use 240 to run all of our charging stations in there. So as a result, that transformer, that transition to the transformer to the panel, and then now we can start adding our breaker and our wire and our conduit and all that stuff. It increases the cost of the installation by having to put in that additional infrastructure on and like at the site just to be able to supply these EV charging stations. And so it does run up electric cost of installation, sometimes an order of magnitude. It could be tens of thousands of dollars. And so with the new NACS standard, the capability of being able to operate off of 277 is unique because remember those three phases. So you have three electric lines coming in. That's why they call it three phase. Well, if I can tap into one of those lines, well, then that gives me 277 volts. If I tap into both of those, two of those three lines, then it gets me 480. That's how you get to your 480 volts. And so by being able to tap into one of those and being able to set up charging stations and deliver 277 volts to the vehicles that can actually take that, what we're seeing is on the AC side of things, we can avoid having to put in that transformer, the panel, and all the other knickknacks that go around with it that basically increase the cost of putting in those charging stations. If you look at a total charging station site, you want to really look at your cost per port. Like how much did it cost you to put each port in? And if you have 10 charging stations and it cost you $80,000, well, then that's an average of $8,000 per port on what it's going to cost you to put in. This one single change that SAE has done with offering that connector being 277 volt capable is it allows you to actually go in and we can maybe put in those same 10 charging stations at $8,000. Okay, like literally for the whole site. And so that definitely decreases the cost per port and getting those charging stations in the ground. I can most likely in an order of magnitude capitalize on a lot of those savings. And not to mention, I could probably install even more charging station with little or with less of a voltage interference or imprint on the total building's overall electrical supply. So that's huge. It's absolutely huge. So well, that's what we wanted to share with you today on that side of things. And so, when it comes to I guess this is kind of how the European electric grid works, and the Chinese grid works. We just do it a little bit different over here. So it was really interesting to see that they're opening up to that 277 standard. Now, here's the catch. Well, why couldn't J1772 standard do that? Well, the max voltage on the J1772 connector is 264. So it wasn't able to tap into that 480 volt single line, boom, produce, a level two charging, for that. So the good thing is that most of your telephone poles, most of your lighting poles in a commercial setting, they're all ran off of uh, three-phase power. And so if you can tap into that, just one of those lines, and put your charging station in, it's going to make the adoption of, very basically heavily condensed cities, such as New York and Boston. It can make some of that street parking available and easier to install, as opposed to the latter. So if you look, some of the other things they're working on is the plug and charge standard for the NACS connector, which we love. Again, we mentioned the 277 volt capable, so we can install more chargers for less money. So that's huge. That should be able to kind of tell and be a signal to manufacturers, hey, you're going to have to start manufacturing your charging station with the ability to be able to use this functionality. And so that's what we're going to start seeing, is these charging manufacturers are going to start producing and creating these charging stations that have the ability to do that. In Europe, they're already doing that. In fact, in Europe, they actually can tap into one of the phases, use that phase, and then they can also connect to the other three phases. And as this phase is like kind of starting to use up a lot more of the capacity, then they can toggle between the phases to make sure that we're not overarching, or kind of getting close to I guess the maximum allowance of kilowatts that's able to come out of that actual panel itself. So some really sophisticated things that they're doing out in Europe and China. That's why they're able to put in this infrastructure at a significantly cost advantage, as opposed to the Americans. So really do like that. If you look, they also introduced a sort of a non-tethered uh, ability or approach. I don't think that the non-tethered stuff is going to be tough. If you look at the European market and the Chinese market when it comes to public infrastructure on the level two side of charging, it's basically just a pedestal with a port there. And you, as the driver, you have your own charger in the back of your car, and you pull it out whenever you need to publicly charge, and you connect, one end to that pedestal, and then you connect the other end to the car. You do the little scan, boom, it starts to charge session. Great, that's awesome. Okay, so that's great for the charging provider, because all I have to do is just provide power and a pedestal, and that's it. I don't have to worry about cables and cable management kits and vandalism and everything else that comes with that. So and at the same time, once the driver plugs inserts their charger, and that it locks the charger, so you can't steal, or there's no theft or anything like that for it. So it worked really well in the Chinese and the European markets, but unfortunately, the infrastructure here in America is it's already out there. They have so many charging stations that already include the cables with it, and so great that the NACS standard has this new, I guess you can call it Type Two untethered connection for mobile and public charging capable, use. But I think the public charging infrastructure is a little too far along for that. But look, time will tell. What I'm saying is that uh, eventually we'll, like, think about it, like cold weather climates. Okay, I got to pull this cable out. I got to sit there and worry about the wrapping and the cladding of the cable. Most drivers struggle with that. They don't want to have to deal with that stuff, and I think that's why the American market, they knew that providing the cable to the driver in the commercial means is just more convenient. That's what they want. That's what the customers wanted. And so, like the charging providers, the manufacturers, they listen to that, and that's what they provide. And so our infrastructure is already kind of set up for that. But if we do happen to change that, we do have the ability to change it. It may take a couple of years, but we do have the ability to change it when it comes to public level two charging. Maybe not necessarily on the DC fast charging side, but definitely public level two charging. So, and you think about it, like the cables, they get dirty, messy. There's no sinks or anything like that to use. Once you have to finish your charging session, and you got to coil the thing back up and throw it in the back of your car, like that's a pain. And so there is modern conveniences to the way that the American public infrastructure on level two is set up. And so I just don't think, even though they have that functionality, which is great for the type two non-tethered connection, I just don't think that it's gonna do well here, or it's gonna be well received. Um, and we also heard that the OEMs are trying to use some sort of NACS adapter in the meantime of getting the OEMs to put the actual charging port, on their vehicles. I don't know. We haven't heard anything from that. We did hear that GM and Ford, confirmed that they're going to start using the Tesla supercharger network as of February 24. So maybe that's something deal on the back end with Tesla and GM and Ford. Um, but I don't know if they're necessarily wasting their time with adapters. I think maybe they're just going to open it up to a few of the Magic Dock superchargers and some of the Gen 4 superchargers that have that Magic Dock, ability, kind of included. But yeah, I mean, that's it. It's just it. It's kind of like, especially when it comes to that non-tethered, connection. It's like, well, that's a war. It's a cable war between the consumer and the charging provider. The charging providers would much rather just put a pedestal up or put a unit up and let you take care of the stuff. And if something's wrong, what are they going to do? They're going to blame you. They're going to blame your unit. They're going to blame your connector. You're the reason, right? You have to go get another one if your latch breaks on your charging connector. Oh, let me tell you about latches. Don't even get me started on that. So look, yes, look, in America we're spoiled, but I think that non-tether thing, I think it will clash with the volume and with the nature that we've created with that convenience factor between the consumer on the consumer side of things. And so, yeah, I mean, if you look at China and Europe, they're about 10 and 5 years ahead of us, respectively. And so it's a good start on there. And they saw this problem beforehand. They knew how this was going to catch on. And so they used that non tethered approach to really make sure that their public charging corridors were not just cluttered with cables and so forth and so on. But here in America, it's a little bit different. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see, but look, the value conclusion of this episode was just the fact that while we love the standardization of any charging protocol, uh, like we said, talked about the non-tethered approach in the Europeans, like kind of type 2 connection uh, for the new 3400 seems to be exactly what America needs at the time at first look. But unfortunately, we may be too far in with our existing public infrastructure to make up that switch for the consumer to bear the burden of convenience for the charging providers. So, yeah, I mean, look, that is there's so much more I can unwrap, and I can tell you we'll probably more than likely do another episode on this as more and more news kind of gathers. But that's a little bit of the nutshell from an EV charging infrastructure play on why it's so advantageous that the NACS standard did release that 277-volt capability on it. We'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I wanted to thank all of our listeners and subscribers today for their time. Look, I hope this episode brought a little bit more value to your day. I know we're all better for it. I love you. And yes, there's no way I could do this without you. So we definitely appreciate you joining us today. Go ahead and click the thumbs up icon, share, comment, like, and subscribe to our channel if you think we earned it. And again, look, thanks for charging up with us today. Keep in mind you can always find us at smartchargeramerica.com. And remember, folks, if you can't charge, you can't drive. So we'll see you next time. Cheers.